The minimum wage law is based on the assumption that some minimum hourly rate of pay should be legislated so that people will have a minimum income to support themselves and their families. The law makes it illegal for an employer to pay an hourly rate any lower than the minimum wage specified by Congress. This means that the higher the minimum wage, the more prosperous the workers will be. If such is true, why not make the minimum hourly wage $20 so that everyone could be better off? The supporters of minimum wage have avoided taking this step at the moment. A basic law of economics states that the higher the price of something, whether it is a service or direct labor, the smaller the quantity demanded. In other words, the higher the price, the smaller the sales will be. When a minimum wage is established at a price above the one that the forces of the market determine, employment opportunities are usually reduced for the least productive workers because their services are priced too high for the market. As the minimum wage is raised, even some workers who have been employed for a while are simply fired because their services do not have more importance to the company than what they are being paid to do. This includes vacations, medical insurance, Social Security, and so on. We can assume that the main impact of minimum wage legislation is to reduce opportunities for useful employment by the potentially least productive individuals. Therefore, the government is preventing the portion of the population that is most economically vulnerable. This outcome may not have been predicted by the well-intentioned legislators who passed the minimum wage law as part of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. The enforcement of minimum wage legislation makes low-skilled labor more expensive than it actually should be, which promotes labor-saving devices that higher-priced labor creates, and raising the prices in the affected industries. This will also reduce the number of young and low-skilled workers entering the labor market, where training and apprenticeship will later permit that worker to obtain a better and higher-paying job in the future. The minimum wage law can actually have a harmful effect on some young workers. Even if an individual were willing to undergo on-the-job training by taking a very low wage for a certain amount of time, either a few months or a full year, the minimum wage would not permit him to do so. For disadvantaged workers, the minimum wage law may actually have an effect on lowering lifetime incomes by a very large amount. Civil rights laws in their initiation were most compassionate by removing legal barriers to the employment of blacks and other minorities. However, it ignored the impact of minimum wage laws on the employment of young people just entering the labor force, particularly on minority teenagers. Minimum wage gives employers incentives to seek and only hire the most productive employees, which means that the organizations are less willing to hire and or train the least productive employee. This includes teenagers and again minorities. With all else being equal between employees, including their productivity, the minimum wage law allows employers to indulge in whatever discrimination that they may hold. The main supporters of the minimum wage have been the labor unions and corporations that compete with the employers of teenagers. The unions know that when the minimum wage raises, the wages of their members rise as well to maintain the difference between skilled and unskilled workers. The corporations are in favor of this because the costs of their competitors will oddly increase as compared to their own. In economic conditions like these, organizations are not just going to hire workers whose labor produces less than the cost of hiring them. Employers will not pay $8.25 an hour to hire a worker whose hourly efforts are only worth $7.25. A higher minimum wage will price even more low-skilled individuals out of a job. Although a small share of these workers will get raises, the others will lose opportunities for employment overall. Minimum wages don't normally distribute income to workers from employers, but to a small group of lucky workers from the unfortunate workers who actually lost their jobs. It is difficult to understand why a government that is supposedly based on moralities of democracy can pass and enforce laws that reduces opportunities for the segment of the population most economically weak, teenagers. From the standpoint of morality and equity, any legislation that makes it harder for teenagers with little skill or no experience to enter the workforce should be unacceptable. As we have shown, the minimum wage law not only discriminates against young and inexperienced workers, it discriminates against young minorities as well. Not only should the minimum wage law not be raised, it should be removed completely. Rather than pursuing policies such as minimum wage increases that create winners and losers, legislators should focus on policies that generate faster economic growth to benefit all workers alike. While minimum wages may be implemented at an attempt to help workers, economic research clearly shows that somebody must pay the price for any increase, and it is usually the least skilled workers and least fortunate among all workers that has to pay.